I spent 31 years leaving flowers on a grave that did not hold my daughter. I found out because an 8-year-old girl slipped a broken music box into my tool case on the 39th floor of a Philadelphia tower and whispered, "Please fix this before my mother sees it." She cries when it plays. Mr. Calvin says the old piano man who knows the song should have died before he found us. I remember every part of that sentence. Not because I understood it right away. I did not. At first, all I understood was the music. The brass cylinder inside that little walnut box turned twice, caught on a bent tooth, and played 6 notes before it stopped. 6 notes were enough. They were the first 6 notes of a lullaby my wife Lydia wrote in our kitchen in 1993, 3 nights before our baby girl was born, 6 nights before a doctor told us our baby girl was dead, and 31 years before a child with my daughter's eyes placed that song in my hands like God had finally run out of patience with silence. The tune was called Little Harbor. Nobody knew it except Lydia, me, and the baby we never got to bring home. That is what I believed. That is what I had survived believing. Then I turned the music box over under the service light beside a grand piano worth more than my house, and I saw 2 initials scratched into the bottom panel with the tip of a sewing needle. SW. My initials. Samuel Ward. Not printed. Not engraved. Scratched by hand in the exact slanted shape Lydia used when she marked jars in the pantry because she thought labels looked too formal for things made at home. I stood there in a ballroom with orchids on every table, champagne chilling in silver buckets, and the city shining through glass walls, holding proof that something I had buried had been breathing somewhere else. The girl looked up at me and said, "Are you okay, sir?" I was not. By the end of this story, I will tell you how that broken music box led me to my daughter, how my own brother turned a newborn baby into money, how a respected doctor built a death certificate out of lies, and how the people who thought an old widower could be managed learned that grief, once it wakes up, can become very patient revenge. Before we go further, let me say this clearly. Some details in this story are fictional and shaped for storytelling. Names, places, and timing are arranged for privacy and dramatic clarity. But the lesson inside it is real enough to carry. If you have ever ignored a strange feeling because the truth would cost too much, stay with me. My name is Samuel Ward. I am 68 years old. For 42 years, I tuned pianos, repaired cracked soundboards, replaced ivory that should not have survived another winter, and listened to rich people tell me their instruments sounded a little off when what they really meant was their children had stopped practicing. My shop sits on Darrow Street in South Philadelphia between a closed bakery and a pharmacy that has changed owners 3 times without changing the smell. The sign above the door says Ward Piano Service in dark green paint. My father painted it in 1978. I keep repainting the same letters because some things do not need improvement. They just need care. I wake at 5:10 every morning whether I have work or not. That is what decades of appointments do to the body. Coffee first. Black. No sugar. Lydia used to say I drank coffee like I was punishing it. After coffee, I unlock the shop, sweep the front room, check the humidifier, and open the ledger even though most people pay through apps now and the ledger has become more ritual than necessity. There are tuning hammers on the wall, felt strips sorted in drawers, action screws in glass jars, and one upright piano in the back that has belonged to nobody for 19 years because the woman who left it for repair died before she could pick it up. I kept meaning to call the family. Then time did what time does. It made neglect look like ownership. My apartment is above the shop. 2 rooms and a kitchen. A narrow bathroom with a radiator that bangs like somebody trapped inside it every January. I had lived there with Lydia for 26 years before she died. I have lived there without her for 7. The place is not sad all the time. People who have not lost someone think grief occupies every corner equally. It does not. Sometimes grief is a chair you avoid. Sometimes it is a cup you never throw away. Sometimes it is the fact that I still buy orange marmalade even though I hate it, because Lydia liked it and the refrigerator looks wrong without the jar. The bedroom closet still has her blue raincoat. The kitchen drawer still has her recipe cards. And in the bottom drawer of my dresser, wrapped in a white handkerchief, is a hospital bracelet so small it seems impossible a human life ever fit inside it. Clara Ward. Born March 18, 1993. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Lydia and I named her before we saw her face. We had argued over names for months. I liked Margaret because it was my mother's name. Lydia said no child should be born already carrying a grandmother's expectations. She liked Clara because it meant clear and bright. She said if the world could not promise kindness, at least we could give the baby a name that sounded like a window opening. Clara lived for 3 days, according to what we were told. 3 days. That is such a small amount of time for a life and such a large amount of time for a parent. You can learn a lot in 3 days. The way a baby curls her fingers around nothing. The soft crease at the base of the neck. The sound a newborn makes that is not crying exactly, more like a complaint filed in a language older than speech. On the 3rd night, the hospital called after midnight. A respiratory complication. A sudden collapse. A failed transfer to a neonatal unit. Dr. Leonard Sloan told us they had done everything. I remember his tie. Navy with tiny gold dots. I remember that because grief sometimes refuses to remember what matters and stores useless objects instead. We were not allowed to see Clara. That is the first sentence that should have broken the whole lie. We were told there had been contamination concerns after an equipment fire near the nursery wing. We were told the hospital had to follow emergency protocol. We were told the body had been transferred for immediate preparation. We were told to let the professionals spare us the worst image of our daughter. We were 37 and exhausted and terrified and not trained to understand that official language can be a curtain. Lydia collapsed against me in the hallway. I held her while Dr. Sloan explained death with the smooth voice of a man who had practiced making cruelty sound clean. My older brother Calvin arrived an hour later. He had always been good in emergencies. That was what I believed then. He handled forms. He spoke to the funeral home. He said there were things a grieving father should not have to do. I let him do them. That is another sentence that took me 3 decades to forgive myself for. I let him do them. The funeral was small. White roses. A tiny casket. Closed. Lydia pressed her palm to the lid and hummed Little Harbor under her breath until I thought the sound would split me open. My brother stood behind us with one hand on my shoulder. If I had turned around, maybe I would have seen something. Maybe not guilt. Guilt has many costumes. But maybe calculation. Maybe relief. Maybe the first version of the man he had already become. I did not turn around. For years after that, Lydia and I lived around Clara's absence. We did not have another child. Not because we chose not to. Because life did not give us one. There were tests. Doctors. Quiet car rides home. Lydia saying she was fine when she was not fine. Me repairing pianos until midnight because soundboards were easier to understand than a wife grieving a child she had held for less than 72 hours. Calvin remained close. Too close, I understand now. He handled taxes when my father got sick. He introduced me to a lawyer after the shop building nearly went into foreclosure during the recession. He visited Lydia when I was out on long appointments. He called her sweetheart in a brotherly way that never bothered me until much later, when almost everything bothered me. He had a talent for standing near pain without looking like he had caused any of it. By the time Lydia died of a stroke 7 years ago, Calvin was the only family I had left. He helped with the hospital again. He helped with the funeral again. He said the same sentence he had said after Clara. There are things a grieving man should not have to do. I did not hear the echo then. I hear it every day now. The job at the Thorn Tower came through a private events coordinator named Beverly Hines. She called on a Tuesday afternoon in early October and said the Thorn Biomedical Foundation needed emergency tuning for a charity dinner. Their regular technician had broken his wrist. The Steinway was on the 39th floor. The client paid same day. The rate was 3 times my usual. I said yes because I am old, not stupid. The Thorn Tower sits near the river, all glass and polished stone, the kind of building that looks less built than placed. Security checked my ID twice. A freight elevator took me up with my tool case, stringing kit, temperament strips, and the kind of quiet suspicion buildings like that reserved for men carrying honest tools. The ballroom was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows. White orchids. Long tables waiting for linen. A black Steinway concert grand sat on the platform near the glass, lid open, strings catching morning light like copper veins. I know pianos. I know them before I touch them. This one had money in its bones. I was halfway through the treble section when I saw Clara Thorne for the first time. Not my Clara. Not yet. At that moment she was only Clara Thorne, founder and chief executive of a biomedical software company that had made hospital records searchable across networks, which is funny in the cruel way life sometimes thinks is clever. She walked into the ballroom with a tablet in one hand and a little girl trailing behind her. Clara Thorne was 31 years old. Dark hair cut blunt at the shoulders. Gray suit. No jewelry except a thin gold chain at her throat. She had the kind of face people describe as composed when they mean difficult to surprise. The little girl was all motion. 8 years old, maybe. Loose curls. Purple sneakers. One front tooth missing. She circled the piano twice while her mother spoke to Beverly about donor seating. Most children touch everything. This child touched nothing. That told me she had been raised around expensive rooms and adult consequences. Her name was June. I learned that because Clara said it without looking away from her tablet. June, please do not climb under the piano. I am investigating the pedals. Investigate from standing. That made me smile. It reminded me of Lydia, who believed children should be corrected without being shrunk. Clara glanced at me once. Polite. Distant. The way wealthy people look at tradesmen who have been approved by security and therefore do not require further thought. I went back to tuning. 20 minutes later Beverly left to handle a catering problem. Clara stepped into a side room for a call. June came to the piano bench and stood there with both hands behind her back. You fix music? She asked. I try. That sounds like a yes pretending to be careful. It is. She considered me for a moment, then looked toward the side room. Can you fix a little one? A little what? She pulled the music box from the pocket of her cardigan. Walnut. Rounded lid. One brass hinge loose. A hairline crack along the side. The kind of thing a careful adult would put on a shelf and a child would actually care about. She placed it in my palm. It got stuck. Mom says nobody should touch it. Mr. Calvin says it is just old trash, but she cried when it stopped playing. I heard Calvin before I understood the rest. My brother's name is not rare, but it is not common enough to pass through me untouched. What Calvin? Mr. Calvin Ward. He comes to Mom's office sometimes. He says he is kind of family but not the nice kind. Children report moral categories more honestly than adults. I turned the little key. The cylinder moved. 6 notes played. Little Harbor. The ballroom fell away. Not physically. The orchids were still there. The windows still held the city. June was still watching me. But inside me, something old and buried stood up so fast it knocked every careful wall in my body loose. I turned the key again. 6 notes. Then the jam. I had not heard that melody outside my own memory since Lydia's funeral. My hand closed around the box too tightly. June saw it. Are you mad? No. You look like grown-ups look when they are about to say no but something worse happened. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither. I turned the box over. That is when I saw the initials. SW. The scratch marks were small, almost hidden near the seam. Lydia's hand. I knew it the way you know the pressure of someone's palm after 30 years of marriage. Where did your mother get this? I asked. June looked toward the side room again. She says it came with her when she was little. She says Grandma Celia kept it in a drawer until Mom was old enough not to break it. But Mr. Calvin said it belonged to someone who lost his mind after a baby died, so it should stay put away. A baby died. Not a baby. A specific baby. My baby. Then June leaned closer and whispered the sentence that started everything. Please fix this before my mother sees it. She cries when it plays. Mr. Calvin says the old piano man who knows the song should have died before he found us. The side room door opened. Clara stepped back into the ballroom. June snatched the box from my hand and tucked it under her cardigan so fast I knew she had hidden things before. Clara looked from June to me. Is everything all right? Fine, I said. My voice did not sound like mine. The piano was not finished. I finished it anyway. That is one thing work gives a man when his life begins to break in public. A sequence. A next note. A job your hands can complete while your mind is somewhere else entirely. I tuned the unisons. Checked the octaves. Played a soft C major arpeggio that filled the ballroom with a clean sound I did not deserve. Clara signed the work order without looking closely. I noticed her left wrist when she reached for the pen. A tiny crescent-shaped birthmark just below the thumb. Lydia had one in the same place. So did Clara Ward for the 3 days we had her. I had kissed that mark through hospital gauze because I was afraid to touch anything else too hard. The room tilted. I thanked Clara Thorne and left before I became a scene. In the freight elevator, I pressed the lobby button and looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from age. From recognition. I did not drive home. I sat in my van in a loading zone for 40 minutes while security guards passed the windshield twice and decided I was not their problem. Then I called the one person I knew who understood that old documents have a smell when they are hiding something. Her name was Miriam Cho. She had been a postal inspector for 24 years, then a private investigator for another 12. I met her in 2016 when a church organist claimed a shipment of rare sheet music had vanished between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Miriam found the music in the organist's nephew's storage unit, billed the church $600, and told the organist's nephew he had the criminal imagination of a wet sandwich. I liked her immediately. She answered on the third ring. Ward piano. Miriam, it is Samuel. I know. My phone is not decorative. I need help. The silence changed. Miriam never wasted seriousness. Where are you? Outside the Thorn Tower. Are you bleeding? No. Are you about to be? I do not think so. Then come to my office. Bring whatever made your voice sound like that. Her office was above a tailor shop on Pine Street. The tailor below her played opera so loud the floorboards vibrated on high notes. Miriam said it kept clients from lying too comfortably. She was 62, narrow, precise, with silver hair cut short and eyes that made you want to organize your sins before she asked for them. I told her everything. The gala. The music box. The song. The initials. June. Clara Thorne's wrist. Calvin's name. My daughter's death. The closed casket. The hospital fire. Dr. Leonard Sloan. My brother handling the forms. I did not make it sound dramatic. It already was. Miriam took notes without interrupting. When I finished, she removed her glasses and said, "Let me say back what I heard. You believe a billionaire CEO may be the baby daughter you were told died 31 years ago because her child possesses a music box that plays a private lullaby, bears your initials in your wife's hand, and is connected by name to your brother, who handled the funeral paperwork." I do not believe it, I said. She looked at me. I cannot survive not knowing. That made her nod. Better sentence. Then she gave me rules. No contacting Clara Thorne. No contacting June. No digging through old grief alone at 2 in the morning and calling it investigation. I agreed to all of it. Mostly. Miriam asked for 3 things. The hospital bracelet. The death certificate. Any document Calvin had handled in 1993. A man can fail to ask the right questions and still keep the wrong answers neatly filed. That evening, I opened the drawer and took out the white handkerchief. The bracelet was inside. Clara Ward. Ward, Clara R. Mother, Lydia Ward. Father, Samuel Ward. Under it was the death certificate. Cause of death, acute respiratory failure following neonatal complications. Attending physician, Leonard Sloan, M.D. Disposition, private burial. Funeral home, Mercer and Sons. Authorized family representative, Calvin Ward. My own name appeared nowhere on the burial authorization. I had never noticed. Or I had noticed and lacked the strength to understand what noticing meant. I set the papers on the kitchen table under the yellow light and read every line like a stranger. By midnight, I found the first crack myself. The funeral home named on the certificate had closed in 1989. 4 years before Clara died. I checked 3 times. Old directory. State business database. A scanned newspaper notice. Mercer and Sons had been dissolved after a tax case in 1989. The address was later used by a medical supply wholesaler. A dead funeral home had buried my daughter. I called Miriam at 12:17. She answered with, "You broke Rule 4. The funeral home did not exist." Silence. Then, email me a photograph and go to sleep. I cannot. Then lie down in the dark and fail at sleep horizontally. That was Miriam's idea of comfort. The next morning she called at 7:30. I pulled the state index. The death certificate number is real, but the certificate attached to that number is not Clara Ward. I sat down slowly. What does that mean? It means somebody took a valid certificate number from a stillbirth case in another county and used it to create a parallel document. On paper, your daughter died. In the original state archive, that number belongs to a male infant in Lancaster County. The radiator started banging in the wall behind me. I remember that because the body reaches for ordinary sound when the mind has been handed impossible information. What about Clara? I am still looking. There are moments when the world becomes too large. The room is the same size. The table is the same table. The mug is still in your hand. But reality expands so violently that you feel like you might fall off the edge of your own life. My daughter had a false death certificate. That did not mean she lived. Miriam kept reminding me of that. A false certificate could hide negligence. A transfer. A mistake. A crime that ended differently. But by then, my mind had already gone back to the music box, the birthmark, June's whisper, Calvin's name. Hope is dangerous when it returns after decades. It does not enter politely. It kicks down a door and demands furniture. Miriam worked for 3 days before she let me come back to her office. When I arrived, she had a folder on the desk and the opera downstairs was silent for once. That made everything worse. She opened with the facts. On March 21, 1993, a newborn female child listed under temporary transfer code CRW was moved from St. Agnes Medical Center to a private pediatric facility in Bala Sinwat. The transfer was entered at 2:13 in the morning. The attending physician field was blank. The transport authorization was signed by a nurse named Patricia Bell. The financial guarantor field was redacted in a scanned copy, but the original payment ledger referenced an external family placement consultant. I heard only pieces at first. Newborn female. CRW. Transfer. 2:13 in the morning. What happened after the pediatric facility? I asked. Miriam slid another page across the desk. An adoption petition, sealed but not sealed well enough for someone with Miriam's patience. Female infant, approximately 1 week old. Adoptive parents, Edmund and Celia Thorne. Finalized November 3, 1993. Child renamed Clara Celia Thorne. My mouth went dry. Clara. They kept her first name, Miriam said softly. Softly from Miriam meant she was worried I might fall apart. I did not. Not then. I stared at the paper. Edmund and Celia Thorne. The Thorne name was old money in Philadelphia. Hospitals. Museums. Foundation boards. The kind of money that does not need to be loud because buildings already speak for it. They bought her. I asked. Miriam did not answer quickly. I do not know that yet. Do not protect me from nouns. She looked at me for a long second. Yes. Someone appears to have moved your daughter into a private adoption through channels that should not have existed. The words should have knocked me down. Instead they made me very still. That is one thing grief and rage have in common. At their strongest, they can look like calm. Calvin? I asked. I have not tied him to the transfer yet. But June did. June tied his name to the music box and to knowledge of you. That is not the same thing, but it is not nothing. Miriam closed the folder. You need to understand something now. Clara Thorne is not a lost object. She is a grown woman with a life, a child, a company, and probably a very complicated relationship to whatever she knows about her origin. You cannot walk in and announce yourself like a verdict. I know. You want to. Yes. Do not. I said I know. She sat back. Then prove it by doing nothing for 48 hours. That sounded impossible. So of course I failed in a smaller way. I did not go to Clara. I went to Calvin. Not directly. I drove past his house. That is the kind of lie men use when they want to feel disciplined. Calvin lived in a stone colonial in Chestnut Hill that he could never have afforded through the real estate consulting business he claimed paid for it. I parked across the street beneath a maple tree and watched lights move behind his curtains. He was 72, 4 years older than me, but he had always seemed younger because vanity oils the joints. When he came out at 8:15 wearing a camel coat and carrying a leather briefcase, I almost started the car and left. Then another car pulled up. Black sedan. Driver stayed inside. The rear door opened. Clara Thorne got out. She did not look like a woman visiting family. She looked like a woman arriving for a negotiation she despised. Calvin smiled. She did not. They went inside. I sat there for 36 minutes while the air in my car went cold. When Clara came back out, she looked pale in the porch light. Calvin followed her to the door and touched her elbow. She pulled away. That one movement told me more than any document had. This was not affection. This was pressure. After she left, Calvin stood on the porch and looked down the street. For one ridiculous second, I thought he saw me. Then his phone rang. He answered and went back inside. I took one photograph of his house, one of the black sedan turning the corner, and one of my own trembling hand on the steering wheel because I wanted a record of what restraint had cost. Miriam was furious when I told her. Not loud. Worse. Quiet. Samuel, you are not a detective. You are a grieving man with a vehicle. I did not approach. You placed yourself near the person we are trying to observe without knowing whether he is observing you. He met with Clara. Yes. And if he saw you, he now knows you know enough to watch. That shut me up. Then she asked for the photographs. Within an hour, she had identified the sedan as belonging to Thorne Biomedical Corporate Security. That told us Clara had not come to Calvin as family. She had come protected. The next question was why. Miriam found part of the answer through old civil filings. Calvin had been sued in 2004 by a trust company for misappropriation of placement fees connected to private domestic adoptions. The case settled. The file was thin. Too thin. But one name appeared twice in the attached correspondence. Leonard Sloan. The doctor who told me my daughter had died. Another name appeared in the witness list. Patricia Bell. The nurse who signed Clara's transfer. There it was. Not proof yet. A triangle. Calvin. Sloan. Patricia. A triangle around a newborn baby. Miriam kept digging. I kept working. At least that is what I called it. I tuned a church piano in Manayunk and missed a sour unison so badly the choir director looked concerned. I replaced a damper spring in a retired judge's home and forgot to invoice him. I opened the shop every morning and closed it every night because routine was the only railing left on the staircase. For days after I saw Clara at Calvin's house, I found an envelope under the shop door. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of Lydia's obituary. Across the bottom someone had written, "Let the dead keep what they carried." I took a photograph. Then I placed the original in a plastic sleeve and called Miriam. She arrived in 20 minutes. She looked at the note, then at me. Now he knows. Calvin? Or someone working for him? What does the sentence mean? It means the person who wrote it thinks your wife knew something. I wanted to reject that. Not because Lydia was incapable of knowing. Because if she had known even a piece, then the last years of our marriage contained a silence I had never heard. Miriam saw my face and softened by 1 degree. I said thinks, Samuel. Not knows. But the note opened another door. Lydia's things. I had boxes in the second room upstairs. I had not opened most of them since she died. That night Miriam and I carried them into the kitchen and sorted until after midnight. School notebooks. Recipe cards. Old church bulletins. Letters from her sister in Oregon. Photographs I could not look at for more than a second. Then, near the bottom of a blue plastic storage bin, under a stack of quilt squares, we found a cassette tape in a paper sleeve. On the sleeve Lydia had written, Clara Song, March 1993. My fingers went numb. We had no cassette player. Nobody has a cassette player until suddenly one becomes the most important machine in the world. Miriam found one at a 24-hour electronics repair place owned by a man who apparently had refused to let any format die. At 1:30 in the morning, in my kitchen, Lydia's voice came out of that old tape with a hiss behind it. Not singing at first. Talking. Sam is asleep in the chair again. He says he is not scared, but he keeps checking the nursery bag every 10 minutes like the diapers might run off. I covered my mouth. Lydia laughed softly on the tape. Lydia laughed softly on the tape. Then she hummed Little Harbor. The melody was younger, a mother trying a psalm. I stopped breathing. Miriam reached for the recorder. I shook my head. The tape continued. Calvin came by today. He was drunk enough to forget which version of the story he was supposed to tell. He said Sloane did what had to be done and that I should be grateful Clara did not end up with strangers who could not give her a life. I asked him what he meant. He cried. Calvin cried, Sam. Then he said I would destroy you if I pulled at it. The recording stopped. The kitchen was silent except for the old machine clicking at the end of the tape. I had imagined many kinds of pain over the years. I had not imagined hearing my dead wife apologize for failing to solve the crime that had destroyed us both. Miriam sat very still. Then she said, this changes things. How? Your wife spoke to Calvin after the fact. She named Sloane. She named Patricia. She suspected Clara lived. And somebody now sent you her obituary, which means they either knew she suspected or fear what she left behind. I looked at the tape recorder. Lydia had not betrayed me. She had been trapped by the same thing that trapped me. The fear that truth might do more damage than silence. Only silence had not protected us. It had protected them. The next morning, Clara Thorne came to my shop. No appointment. No assistant. No black sedan visible. Just Clara in a dark coat standing beneath the green sign my father painted before she was born. I was in the back replacing hammers on a Wurlitzer when the bell over the door rang. I came out wiping my hands on a cloth and nearly stopped moving. She looked around the shop with controlled attention. Assessment. The way she had looked at the ballroom, at me, at every room she entered. Mr. Ward, she said. Yes. My daughter told me she gave you something at the foundation dinner. I did not answer fast enough. That was not a question, she said. I respected her for that. She asked if I could fix it. Did you? The cylinder tooth is bent. I could. That is not what I asked. What photograph? She opened her phone and showed me a scanned picture. Me at 37, standing beside Lydia in the hospital hallway before Clara was born. I had never seen that photograph. My chest tightened so sharply I had to put one hand on the counter. Where did you get that? My adoptive mother's files. She corrected herself after a beat. My mother's files. Celia kept more than she told my father. Did she know? Clara's jaw tightened. I think she knew enough to feel guilty and not enough to be brave. That sentence could have described most of us. We stood in silence. Then Clara said, I have received payments requests from Calvin Ward since I was 25. I did not speak. He never called them blackmail. People like him rarely use honest words when softer ones can invoice better. He called them legacy management. Privacy protection. Family containment. At first I thought he was only exploiting my adoption records. Then he began mentioning St. Agnes, Leonard Sloane, and a piano tuner who had lost his mind after a baby died. She looked at me. I hired counsel. Security. Investigators. Everyone found fragments. Nobody found enough. Miriam might. Who is Miriam? A woman Calvin should have been more afraid of. That almost made Clara smile. Almost. Then she saw the cassette recorder on the counter. Lydia's tape was still beside it. Her eyes moved to the handwritten sleeve. Clara Song, March 1993. She read it once. Then again. My name was Clara before the adoption, she said. Yes. Did she write that? My wife. Her voice changed slightly. May I hear it? I should have said no. Not because she had no right. Because neither of us was ready. But readiness is overrated when the truth has finally arrived at the door. I pressed play. Lydia's voice filled the shop. Hiss. Breath. A young mother laughing softly about diapers. Then Little Harbor. Clara did not cry at first. She stood completely still, one hand at her side, the other closing slowly around the phone she still held. When the later recording began, the one where Lydia apologized, Clara turned away from me. Not to hide tears. To survive being seen hearing them. At the end of the tape, she asked one question. Did you know? No, I do not know what to do with you, she said. I do not know what to do with you either. That was the first honest thing between us. She looked at the pianos. Then at the counter. Then at me. If Calvin is lying, I want proof. If he is telling the truth about any part of it, I want proof. And if he helped steal me from you, I do not want an emotional reunion. I want him unable to do this to anyone again. I had spent 31 years imagining my daughter as a child. In that moment, I met the woman. And the woman was not asking to be rescued. She was asking to go to war correctly. Miriam arrived within the hour. The first meeting between Miriam Cho and Clara Thorne lasted 4 hours and produced 3 cups of untouched coffee, 2 legal pads of notes, and 1 sentence I will never forget. Miriam looked across my kitchen table and said, "We are not trying to prove a miracle. We are trying to prove a transaction." Clara nodded like that made more sense to her than family ever had. She brought files. A lot of files. Security reports. Payment records. Emails from Calvin. Scanned letters sent to her office. Copies of adoption documents Celia had kept in a locked box. A photograph of the music box in Clara's nursery when she was 3. And 1 small envelope containing a second hospital bracelet. Not the one I had. A different one. Clara Thorne. Temporary Infant ID, CRW. Transfer Facility, Bala Sinwad Pediatric Care. The bracelet had been in Celia Thorne's lockbox. Clara said she found it after Celia died. Celia had left no explanation. Only documents arranged like an apology she lacked the courage to make in language. Miriam placed my bracelet beside Clara's. 2 plastic bands on the table. One from the baby who died on paper. One from the baby who lived in another house. The same initials. The same date. The same child. We did the DNA properly. No stolen cups. No secret samples. Clara requested the test through her legal counsel, with documented consent, chain of custody, and every boring procedural step Miriam insisted on because she said truth that cannot survive procedure is just gossip with confidence. The result came back 6 days later. Probability of parent-child relationship, 99.9992%. Clara read the number at my kitchen table. She did not hug me. She did not call me Dad. She set the paper down and asked for water. I got it for her. When I put the glass in front of her, her hand shook once. Only once. Then she said, "I have spent my whole adult life making hospital systems talk to each other because I believed better records saved people. And the first record that mattered in my life was a lie." Nobody had an answer to that. Some sentences do not ask for one. The DNA result did not solve everything. It made denial harder. That is not the same thing. Calvin could claim ignorance. Sloane could claim emergency confusion. Patricia could claim administrative error. The Thornes were dead, which made their money easy to blame and impossible to question. To do more than discover, we needed them talking. That was when Clara showed us the payment schedule. Calvin had received money from Celia Thorne from 1994 until 2011. After Edmund died, the payments changed accounts. After Celia died, Calvin approached Clara directly. The first demand was $50,000. The second was $75,000. Then smaller annual transfers disguised as consulting fees tied to a company called Ward Legacy Advising. My brother had been paid for my daughter once. Then paid for hiding the sale for 30 years. I remember thinking that language is too weak for some crimes. Theft was too small. Kidnapping was too narrow. Fraud sounded too clean. There should be a word for converting another family's entire future into private income. Miriam said there was. Conspiracy. Clara said, and extortion. I said, and damnation. Miriam looked at me. Courts rarely use that one, but write it in your heart if it helps. The next crack came from Patricia Bell. She was 74 and living in a retirement community outside Reading under the name Patricia Bell Hargrove. Miriam found her through a nursing license renewal and a charity raffle photograph where she stood beside a basket of jams looking like every grandmother anyone would trust too quickly. We did not visit her at first. Clara's legal team sent a letter requesting an interview regarding historical adoption irregularities connected to St. Agnes Medical Center. Patricia called Calvin within 13 minutes. We knew because Clara had already placed a private security watch on Calvin's known numbers after the threats began. Not content. Just call pattern. 13 minutes. That told us enough. Calvin called Leonard Sloan next. Sloan was retired and living in Naples, Florida, which felt insulting in the specific way villains often age somewhere sunny. He did not answer Calvin's first call. He answered the second. Then Calvin called Clara. She put him on speaker with Miriam recording from her side and counsel present. His voice came through smooth as old oil. Clara, I heard you have been making inappropriate inquiries. Clara looked at Miriam. Miriam nodded once. Clara said, about my birth, yes. Your birth was handled with unusual sensitivity. Digging into it now would create pain for people who cannot defend themselves. My biological mother is dead. My adoptive parents are dead. Who exactly are you protecting? A pause. Then Calvin said, you have always been smart enough to understand that legitimacy has value. There it was. Not love. Not truth. Legitimacy. Clara's face did not move. What do you want? I want you to consider whether your company, your foundation, your daughter, and your public profile benefit from an old scandal being dragged into daylight by a lonely piano tuner with documented grief issues. I was standing in the room when he said that. Lonely piano tuner. Documented grief issues. It is strange what hurts after the big wound. A small phrase can still find meat. Clara said, are you threatening me? I am advising you. What would your advice cost this time? Calvin breathed once through his nose. $1 million into the same structure we used before. After that, I retire from the matter permanently. Miriam wrote one word on her legal pad and turned it toward Clara. Good. Clara said, I need time. Take 48 hours. I will take 72. Do not be cute, Clara. She looked at the phone like it was something stuck to her shoe. Do not mistake silence for consent, Calvin. Then she ended the call. Nobody spoke for a moment. Miriam finally said, congratulations. Your brother remains stupid enough to be arrogant. Clara looked at me. He hates you. Yes. Why? I thought of our childhood. Calvin older. Calvin charming. Calvin always one step ahead until the bill arrived and someone else paid it. Me staying in the shop. Me marrying Lydia. Me inheriting our father's building because I had been the one who kept the business alive while Calvin chased deals that sounded better than work. Because I kept the things he could only sell. That was the closest answer I had. The threat changed the pace. Clara brought in federal counsel because extortion crossed wires, accounts, company systems, and old adoption documents moving across state lines. Miriam brought in Detective Agnes Price, a financial crimes investigator who looked like she had been assembled out of black coffee and court orders. Price listened to the story in Clara's conference room with no visible emotion until Miriam played Lydia's tape. Then something in her jaw shifted. Not sympathy. Purpose. She said, we need a meeting where Calvin believes payment is possible and panic is unnecessary. Clara said, he will want Samuel excluded. Price looked at me. Good. Then we include him later. I did not like that. Nobody asked whether I liked it. That is another lesson old men have to learn if they live long enough. Your pain is not always the most useful tool in the room. The plan came together over 10 days. Clara would tell Calvin she was willing to settle if all historical exposure was ended in one final documented agreement. Calvin would insist on using his own attorney. We suspected the attorney would not know the full story. That was fine. The real target was not the lawyer. It was Calvin's need to control loose ends. Miriam believed he would bring Patricia or Sloane into the conversation if he felt the final payment required assurances that nobody else could surface later. Clara's counsel drafted a fake settlement framework that looked plausible enough to flatter a criminal and vague enough to make him talk. $1 million. Mutual confidentiality. No contact with Samuel Ward. No further claims connected to the 1993 adoption. No disclosure of hospital irregularities. The meeting would take place in a private conference suite at Thorne Biomedical. Clara's territory. Calvin agreed too quickly. That worried Miriam. He has another move, she said. What kind? The kind men like him keep in their back pocket when money alone stops being enough. We learned what that meant the next day. My shop was broken into. Nothing obvious was stolen. That was the point. The register was untouched. Tools remained. The old upright still sat in the back. But my apartment had been searched. Not ransacked. Searched. Drawers opened and closed carefully. Boxes moved and replaced badly enough that I noticed. Lydia's tape was gone. The original hospital bracelet was gone. The false death certificate was gone. Whoever came in knew what mattered. I stood in the bedroom doorway and felt something inside me go very quiet. Miriam arrived with Detective Price. They photographed everything. A forensic tech lifted prints that probably would not matter. Clara sent a security copy of Lydia's tape because Miriam had digitized it the first night. She had also scanned every document. The originals being stolen hurt. It did not kill the case. That was when I understood what careful people do for grieving men. They make copies before grief trusts the table. At 9 that night, Calvin called me. I had not heard his voice directly since the music box. I answered because Price told me to. Miriam sat across from me, recorder on. Sammy, he said. He was the only person alive who still called me that. It made my skin crawl. Calvin. I hear you have been upsetting people. I hear you have been selling dead babies. Miriam's eyes widened slightly. That was not in the recommended script. Calvin went silent. Then he laughed softly. That temper of yours. Lydia used to say you hid it under sawdust. You do not get to say her name. Of course I do. I was there for both funerals. Both. Clara and Lydia. He had the cruelty to include my daughter's false funeral in the count. I nearly broke then. Miriam held up one finger. Stay. Calvin continued. You need to ask yourself what you gain by tearing open a history that will not give you back what you lost. She is alive. She is not yours. That sentence landed in a place I did not know could still bruise. She was mine when you sold her. Another silence. Then his voice changed. Not much. Enough. Be careful, Sammy. Old men fall. Old buildings burn. People forget to turn things off in shops full of lacquer and dust. Miriam wrote threat on the legal pad. I looked at the word. Then I said, you always were dramatic when you were scared. He hung up. The next morning, the fire inspector found a cut gas line behind the shop stove. Not fully open. Not yet. Scored and loosened. A delayed accident waiting for one wrong bump or one evening pilot light. Calvin had moved from hiding the past to clearing the future. That gave Detective Price what she needed to widen the operation. The 10 days before the settlement meeting were not empty days. They were the days when the past stopped arriving as one grand revelation and started arriving as boxes. Bank boxes. Hospital boxes. Storage boxes. The kind with brittle tape, soft corners, and labels written by people who believed paper could sleep forever if nobody shook the shelf. Clara had an entire records team at her company. People who could build a timeline from 3 signatures, 2 routing numbers, and a fax header that looked like a gray snowstorm. I had Miriam. That was better. Clara's people found documents quickly. Miriam found what documents were ashamed of. She started with the cemetery. Not because she expected a body. Because every false burial still requires someone to sell the shape of one. The cemetery office was a brick building near the east gate with plastic flowers in the window and a printer that sounded like it was chewing gravel. The woman behind the desk had worked there 18 years and treated grief with the practical kindness of a person who knew sentiment did not keep maps organized. Miriam gave her the plot number. The woman pulled a ledger from a side cabinet. A real ledger. Brown cover. Cloth spine. Pages thick enough to make lies feel heavier. She ran one finger down a column and stopped. Then she frowned. I knew that frown by then. It was the frown honest people make when dishonest records try to pass through their hands. What is it? I asked. The woman looked at Miriam first. Symbolic interment. My throat tightened. What does that mean? She looked uncomfortable. It means the plot was used for a memorial marker, but our records do not show a casket received. I heard the printer chewing gravel in the next room. I heard a truck backing somewhere outside. I heard Miriam inhale once and stay quiet. 31 years of flowers. 31 years of kneeling. 31 years of talking to grass above nothing. I did not collapse. I did not shout. I asked, who paid for it? The woman turned the ledger. Calvin Ward. Paid in cash. March 24, 1993. There are facts that do not surprise you because they confirm what you already know. They still hurt. Confirmation is not comfort. It is pain with receipts. Miriam photographed the entry. The woman made a certified copy. Then she said something I still appreciate. I am sorry this office helped make a place for a lie. Most institutions do not apologize that cleanly. I told her thank you. Outside, I stood by Clara's empty grave and looked at the stone. Beloved daughter. March 1993. The wind moved dead leaves along the path. For years I had thought the worst thing about that grave was the child beneath it. Now I knew the worst thing was the absence. Not emptiness. Absence made deliberately. A hole manufactured so Calvin could stand beside it and pretend to mourn. Miriam stood a few feet away and gave me room. After a while she said, Samuel, we can leave. Not yet. I crouched and touched the cold stone. I am sorry, I said. Not to Clara. Not exactly. To the version of me who had believed people because disbelief would have required strength I did not have. To Lydia. To the baby we thought we had buried. To the grown woman who had lived with a music box and a name that belonged to a story nobody had been brave enough to tell her. When we got back to the shop, Clara was waiting outside in the black sedan. She got out before the driver could open the door. Miriam handed her the copy of the cemetery ledger. Clara read it on the sidewalk. Her face did not change until she reached Calvin's name. Then her eyes closed. Only for a second. When she opened them, she looked at me. I am sorry you were made to mourn a place. That was exactly what it was. A place. Not a person. Calvin had given us a location for grief so we would not search for the living. The next box came from Clara's mother's attorney. Celia Thorne had left instructions that certain personal files be released to Clara only if Clara ever requested birth-related materials, in writing. That phrase bothered me. Birth-related materials. As if motherhood were a subfolder. Clara had requested them 2 years earlier after Calvin's second demand. The attorney had claimed there was nothing beyond what had already been given. Clara sent a stronger letter this time. Lawyers have tones the way musicians have keys. This one was written in the key of open the box or explain yourself under oath. The box arrived the next morning. Inside were letters Celia never mailed. Some were addressed to Clara. Some to Edmund. One to Lydia Ward. Clara did not open that one immediately. She placed it on my kitchen table and looked at it like it was breathing. The envelope had yellowed. Lydia Ward was written in careful blue ink. No address. No stamp. Just her name. Clara asked, do you want to read it? I wanted to say no. Not because I did not want to know. Because I feared there was no bottom to knowing. Miriam said, it may matter. So I opened it. Celia's handwriting was elegant, even in confession. Dear Mrs. Ward. That was how it began. Dear Mrs. Ward, there is no moral version of this letter. There is only the one I keep writing because silence has become heavier than shame. I read slowly. Celia wrote that she had been told the infant's parents had consented to a private placement after a medical scare made them fear they could not provide long-term care. She wrote that she believed it at first because desperate people believe what gives them the thing they want most. She wrote that within a month, details began to feel wrong. No signed consent. No direct meeting. No clear agency. Only Calvin Ward assuring them discretion was a kindness. She wrote that Edmund told her to stop looking. She wrote that she did stop. Then, years later, Clara asked why she had no newborn photographs before the age of 3 weeks, and Celia went into the garage and vomited into a bucket because the answer had been living inside the house the whole time. Clara stood at the kitchen counter while I read. She held both hands around a glass of water she had not touched. The letter ended with a sentence that made the room feel smaller. If Clara ever finds you, or you find her, please tell her the worst thing about stolen joy is that it still feels like joy while you are holding it. I set the letter down. Clara turned away. No one spoke. Miriam removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, which was her version of a breakdown. After a while Clara said, "She loved me." "Yes," I said. "And she knew." "Yes." Both things were true. That is what makes some pain unbearable. If Celia had been only a villain, Clara could hate her cleanly. If she had been only a mother, Clara could grieve her cleanly. Instead she had been human in the ugliest possible way. She had loved the child and protected the lie that delivered her. Clara took the letter home. She asked if I wanted a copy. I said no. Then I called her 10 minutes later and asked for one. Pride has terrible timing. The third box came from Calvin without his permission. Detective Price got a limited warrant for records related to Ward Legacy advising after the gas line incident and the extortion call. Before the full search, the warrant let investigators pull bank statements, business registration filings, and communication metadata. Price invited Clara, Miriam, and me to the station annex when the first batch had been reviewed. I had never sat in an interview room as anything other than someone helping tune the upright in the police benefit hall. The room was smaller than television promised. A table. 4 chairs. A camera in the corner. A wall clock that made every second seem suspicious. Price laid out the timeline. March 1993, $80,000 from a Thorne family trust into an intermediary account. March 24, cemetery payment by Calvin Ward. April 1993, $20,000 to Leonard Sloan through a consulting entity that had no other clients. April 1993, $7,500 to Patricia Bell, marked as emergency nursing support. May 1993, Calvin pays off a gambling debt through a cashier's check purchased in cash. I looked up. Gambling. Price nodded. Atlantic City. He was deeper than we first knew. I thought back to Calvin in those years. New suits. Big plans. Always talking about development deals, medical placement consulting, private opportunities. I thought he was ambitious. Maybe he was. But ambition without conscience is just appetite wearing shoes. Price continued. The payments did not stop. They changed shape. Annual payments from Celia's personal account. Then payments routed through foundation consultancies. Then Calvin's demands to Clara after Celia's death. The total was larger than any of us had expected. $2,480,000 across 31 years. Clara sat back. That number did what the birth records had not. It turned her face cold. Not because she cared about the money most. Because numbers reveal repetition. A single payment can hide inside panic. 31 years of payments is a system. My life had a subscription fee, she said. No one corrected her. There are metaphors so accurate they stop being metaphors. Price showed us one more page. A recent draft contract between Ward Legacy Advising and a property acquisition firm. The subject was my shop building. Not Calvin's building. Mine. The contract referenced a future authority event expected within 6 months. Future authority event. Miriam read it twice. Then she looked at me. He was planning to get control of your property. How? Price answered. There is a draft petition in county probate to question your capacity. It was not filed, but it was prepared. It cites grief fixation, delusional claims regarding a deceased infant, and declining judgment around business assets. The air left the room. There was the final shape of it. Calvin had sold my daughter. Collected money for silence. Threatened my shop. Then planned to use my discovery of the truth as proof I had lost my mind. Clara said, he was going to make Samuel sound unstable by describing the crime as fantasy. Price nodded. Exactly. Miriam tapped the table once. That explains why he escalated after the gala. The moment Samuel could connect the music box to Clara, Calvin needed either control or removal. Removal. Such a clean word. My gas line said it less cleanly. That night I could not stay upstairs. I went down to the shop and sat beside the abandoned upright. The keys were yellowed. Middle C stuck when pressed too softly. I played the first 6 notes of Little Harbor with one finger. The sound was ugly. Out of tune. Honest. After a while Clara came in. I had not heard the bell over the door. She stood in the dim front room wearing a coat over exercise clothes, like she had left somewhere without deciding to leave. I drove around for an hour, she said. That sometimes helps. Did it ever? No. She came to the piano and sat beside me on the bench. Not close. Close enough. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, did you hate the thorns when you read the letter? Yes. She nodded. Do you now? Yes. Less simply. That answer seemed to satisfy her because it matched the mess inside her. She looked at the keys. I keep thinking that if I condemn them completely, I erase the only childhood I know. And if I defend them, I betray you and Lydia. You are not responsible for making the dead comfortable. She looked at me sharply. I surprised myself too. Maybe because I had spent so long doing exactly that. She said, that sounds like something someone should have told you 30 years ago. Yes. Would you have listened? No. That got another small laugh. Then she played the first note of Little Harbor. Wrong key. I corrected her gently. She tried again. 1 note. Then 2. Then 6. The same 6 notes that had broken the ballroom open. She stopped. I hate that a song can belong to me and not belong to me. It can do both. How? Music is better at sharing than people. She looked at me for a long moment. Did you say things like that when you were younger? Your mother made me sound smarter than I was. This time the laugh stayed. It did not fix anything. It gave us one room where nothing was being recorded, leveraged, or cross-examined. That mattered. The next day, June came to the shop with Clara's security driver waiting outside. She carried a backpack shaped like a frog and informed me that frogs were underrated musicians because they understood rhythm. I had no argument ready. Clara stayed by the door, pretending to check her phone while listening to every word. June asked to see where I fixed the box. I showed her the workbench. She touched nothing until I said she could. That child understood permission better than many adults in the case. She looked at the tiny screws, the brass comb, the cleaning cloth. Then she asked, did Mr. Calvin break it? Clara looked up. I did not answer quickly. June said, Mom says when adults pause, it means the answer has teeth. That child was dangerous. No, I said. Time broke it. But Mr. Calvin wanted it to stay broken. June considered that. Why? Because it remembered something. She nodded solemnly. Objects do that. Clara closed her eyes briefly, as if 8-year-old wisdom was going to be the thing that finally finished her. June then asked if I was her grandfather. The shop went still. Clara looked at me. Not warning. Not permission. Something more fragile. I crouched so I was not looking down at June. I am your mother's biological father, I said. That makes me your biological grandfather. But families sometimes need time to decide what names feel right. June frowned. That is too many words. Yes. Can I call you Mr. Sam until I decide? I would like that. She nodded. Good. Mr. Sam, your piano is dusty. That was June. She could walk through emotional wreckage and still locate a housekeeping failure. Clara came back the following evening without June. She brought 2 photographs. One was of her at about age 5, sitting beside Celia at a garden party, hair in a ribbon, face turned away from the camera. The other was me and Lydia at our wedding, copied from the file Celia had kept. Clara placed them side by side on my counter. I spent an hour looking for myself in them, she said. Did you find anything? My jaw is Celia's teaching. My posture is Edmund's house. My eyes are Lydia's. My hands are yours. I do not know what part is mine. All of it. She shook her head. That is the comforting answer. It is also true. She looked at me then with a kind of tired frustration that felt almost intimate. You keep answering like a father when I have not decided what you are. That hurt. It also helped. Because it was honest. I am trying not to. I know. I am failing. Yes. We sat with that. Then she said, but not badly. That was the first mercy she gave me on purpose. I carried it carefully. Miriam said all of this mattered because Calvin would try to turn the story into emotion. He would claim everyone had been loved. He would claim the result justified the theft. He would claim Clara's success proved him right. He would claim my grief made me unreliable. He would claim Lydia's silence was consent. He would claim Celia's love purified the crime. So Miriam made us prepare for those arguments before they arrived. She built a wall of facts on her office corkboard. Not red string. Miriam hated red string. Red string is what television uses when it does not trust viewers to understand folders, she said. She used neat columns. Birth. Transfer. False death. Money. Extortion. Threat. Capacity plot. Each column had documents. Each document had a source. Each source had a weakness written below it. That was Miriam's genius. She did not only collect proof. She attacked it first. Cemetery ledger. Strength, contemporaneous record. Weakness, employee not original witness. Lydia tape. Strength, names Calvin, Sloane, Patricia. Weakness, recorded years after event, emotional. Payment records. Strength, objective financial trail. Weakness, motive must be inferred. Calvin call. Strength, direct demand. Weakness, euphemistic language. Gas line. Strength, timing and threat. Weakness, physical actor not yet identified. Music box. Strength, unique melody and initials. Weakness, sentimental unless tied to records. DNA. Strength, identity. Weakness, does not prove crime alone. I stood in front of that board for a long time. It looked nothing like justice in movies. No dramatic photograph. No single smoking gun. Just pressure points. A structure built slowly enough that a liar could not escape through one broken board. Miriam came to stand beside me. You wanted one proof, she said. Yes. Most real cases are not one proof. They are a room full of smaller things refusing to move. That line stayed with me too. Maybe because it described grief. Maybe because it described me. The day before the meeting, Calvin made his final private attempt. He came to my shop in person. No warning. No call. The bell over the door rang at 4:22. I looked up from a stripped action rail and saw my brother standing in the doorway in a charcoal coat, leather gloves, and the same smile he used at funerals. Miriam was not there. Clara was not there. Detective Price was not there. But the shop camera Clara's security team had installed after the break-in was running. So was the recorder in my apron pocket. Careful people had made me less alone than I looked. Sammy, Calvin said. Calvin. He looked around the shop. Still smells like Dad in here. No. It smells like work. Easy mistake for you. His smile thinned. Always with the little cuts. You came for something. I came because tomorrow can be unnecessary. I set down the rail. Can it? He walked farther in, touching the edge of a piano as if he had any right to lay hands on honest wood. You think Clara is on your side? She is on her own side. People like that always are. She will use you for moral leverage, then return to her tower while you sit above this shop feeling noble and broke. Sounds frightening. It should. I know her world better than you do. You sold her into it. He turned. There was the flash. The real Calvin under the varnish. I placed her where she could become someone. She was already someone. She was a sick infant born to a piano tuner and a school secretary in a failing neighborhood. My wife was a librarian. What? You always called her a school secretary when you wanted to make her smaller. She was a librarian. For some reason, that angered him more than the accusation. Maybe because correction is intolerable to men who survive by rewriting. He stepped closer. You want to know the truth, Sam? Lydia would have forgiven me before you did. I felt the recorder against my chest like a second heartbeat. Why? Because Lydia understood sacrifice. No. Lydia understood children. He looked toward the staircase leading upstairs. Where is the tape? There. Direct. Useful. What tape? He smiled. The one she should have burned. I let the silence sit. Miriam had trained me. People like Calvin hate silence because they mistake it for losing. He filled it. She called me after she made it. Did you know that? Crying. Always crying by then. She said she had put everything somewhere safe. She said if I ever hurt you, the truth would come out. I did not know that. The room shifted around me. Lydia had done more than suspect. She had tried to protect me with the only weapon she had left. Calvin kept going. I told her truth would kill you. She believed me. Because she knew you, Sammy. She knew you could survive loss, but not humiliation. That was cruel enough to be partly true. I asked, why come now? Because I am offering you one last chance to leave tomorrow alone. Let Clara pay. Let everyone keep their shape. My shape was built around a fake grave. Your shape kept you alive. No. It kept you paid. His face hardened. Then he made the mistake Miriam had hoped for. Do you think anybody will believe you did not know something was wrong? A man visits an empty grave for 31 years and never notices the burial record. A man lets his brother handle the forms and then complains 3 decades later. I can make you look like what you were. Weak. Grateful. Conveniently blind. I thought that would hurt more. It did hurt. But by then I had heard Lydia's voice. I had held Clara's DNA result. I had watched June stand in my dusty shop and ask direct questions no adult had earned the right to dodge. Calvin's words found less room than they used to. I said, tomorrow, tell that to the microphones. He went still. Not enough to prove he understood. Enough to prove he feared understanding. What microphones? I picked up the action rail again. Goodbye, Calvin. He left without another word. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Miriam. She had been listening from the van parked across the street. I take back 3% of the terrible things I have said about your impulse control, she said. Only 3. Do not get greedy. That recording became the bridge between the old crime and the new threat. Calvin admitted he knew of Lydia's tape. He admitted he wanted it suppressed. He admitted Clara would pay. He admitted the false narrative he planned to use against me. Not enough alone. Nothing alone. But another board refusing to move. That night, I did not sleep. At 2 in the morning, I went downstairs and sat at the workbench with the repaired music box. I wound it once. Little Harbor played. Then I took out a pencil and wrote Lydia a letter. I had not written to her since the first year after her death. Back then the letters were mostly weather, shop news, useless apologies. This one was different. I told her I found Clara. I told her Clara had her mouth in my hands and a patience that looked nothing like mine. I told her June was funny and dangerous and probably needed a piano teacher with stronger nerves than I had. I told her Calvin was going to lose. Then I crossed that line out. Not because it was false. Because it was too small. I wrote instead, Calvin is going to stop owning the story. That felt right. When the sun came up, I put the letter in the drawer with the copy of the hospital bracelet. Then I shaved. Put on my good gray suit. The one I wore to Lydia's funeral. The one I had not touched since. It did not fit perfectly anymore. Neither did the life I was wearing. But it would do. The settlement meeting stayed scheduled. But now there were police in the building. Fire investigators on call. A warrant ready for Calvin's house if he said the wrong thing or touched the wrong account. Clara wanted June out of the city for the day. June refused to leave until the music box was fixed. That child had more steel than half the adults in the story. So I fixed it. The night before the meeting, I sat at my workbench under the green lamp and opened the little walnut box. The brass cylinder was slightly warped. One tooth bent inward. The governor dirty. The spring tired but not broken. Old machines often fail like old people do. Not all at once. In small acts of stubbornness. I cleaned it. Straightened the tooth. Adjusted the comb. Oiled the pivot. Then I wound it 1/2 turn. Little Harbor played all the way through. Not perfectly. A little thin. A little aged. But complete. I sat there with both hands on the bench and listened to my wife's song come out of a box that had crossed 31 years without permission. For the first time since the gala, I cried. Not the sharp crying of shock. Something lower. Older. The kind of crying that feels like the body finally admitting it has been standing too long. In the morning, I put the music box in my coat pocket and went to Thorne Biomedical. The conference suite was on the 41st floor. Higher than the ballroom. Smaller. No orchids. No donors. Just a long table, gray chairs, water glasses, a wall screen, and 6 microphones that looked like ordinary conferencing equipment and absolutely were not. Clara sat at the head of the table in a navy suit. Miriam sat to her left. Clara's counsel sat to her right. Detective Price watched from the adjoining room with 2 officers and a federal agent whose name I was told and immediately forgot because some people enter your life as titles, not names. I was in the adjoining room too. That was the compromise. I could listen. I could not speak unless the plan required it. I hated it. I accepted it. Calvin arrived at 10 exactly. He brought a lawyer who looked both expensive and underinformed. That was useful. Calvin also brought Patricia Bell. That was better. She looked smaller than I expected. White hair. Pearl earrings. Hands folded around a purse on her lap. The kind of old woman strangers help across streets. Leonard Sloan joined by video from Florida. Tanned. Relaxed. Still wearing the doctor face. I wanted to break the screen. Clara opened the meeting with no warmth. My position is simple. You have requested money in exchange for silence. I am prepared to consider a final settlement only if I know exactly what exposure I am buying out. Calvin smiled. Always efficient. Always. His lawyer shifted slightly. He did not like the word money. He liked the word settlement. Criminals and lawyers often differ most in vocabulary. Calvin began carefully. He framed the past as an irregular private placement. He said Edmund and Celia Thorne had been desperate for a child. He said Samuel and Lydia Ward had suffered a neonatal tragedy. He said unusual decisions were made in an emotional emergency. Clara let him talk. Then she asked, was Samuel Ward's child alive when she left St. Agnes? Calvin looked at Patricia. Patricia looked down. Sloan leaned toward his camera. We should avoid inflammatory phrasing. Clara repeated, was the child alive? Calvin's lawyer said, my client is not here to make admissions of criminal conduct. Miriam leaned forward. Then he is here to request $1 million with no explanation. The lawyer looked at Calvin. That was good. The underinformed lawyer was beginning to understand he had been invited to a table set with knives. Calvin exhaled. Yes. The child was alive. Even knowing it, hearing him say it moved through me like weather. Clara did not blink. Did Samuel and Lydia Ward consent to the adoption? No. Patricia whispered, Calvin. He shot her a look. Too late. Clara continued. Did Dr. Sloane tell them the child was dead? Sloane said, the medical situation was unstable. Clara turned to the screen. Did you tell them she was dead? Sloane's tan face went still. I communicated an outcome that had already been administratively determined. Miriam made a small sound that might have been disgust or professional admiration for how ugly a sentence can be while staying grammatically correct. Clara said, who determined it? No answer. Then Patricia spoke. Not loudly. Not bravely. Like a woman tired of holding a hot coal that had stopped warming her years ago. Calvin did. Calvin turned on her. Patricia. No, she said, surprising all of us. I am 74 years old. I am not going to prison for your confidence. The room shifted. Fear had found a new host. Patricia kept going. The baby was cyanotic after a breathing episode, but she stabilized. Sloane said the parents were exhausted and not thinking clearly. Calvin said there was a placement family already prepared and that everyone would be better off. He said the wards had no money for a fragile child and the Thorns had everything. Sloane said, that is a gross distortion. Patricia looked at the screen. You took $80,000. There was no elegant sentence left after that. Calvin's lawyer put both hands flat on the table. I need to pause this conversation. Clara said, no. I need to hear the rest. The lawyer said, I advise everyone to stop speaking. Nobody listened. That is the thing about greed and guilt. Once they start fighting inside the same room, legal advice becomes background music. Miriam asked the next question. Who falsified the death certificate? Sloane said nothing. Patricia said, Leonard prepared the medical language. Calvin provided the funeral home information. I entered the transfer under temporary code. Clara asked, why keep my first name? That question did what the legal ones had not. It made the room human for 1 second. Patricia looked at her. Celia asked. She said if the baby had been called Clara for 3 days, changing that too felt like stealing twice. Clara's face changed. I could not read it. Maybe she could not either. Calvin seized the softness. You see. The Thorns loved you. You had a life Samuel could never have given you. Clara turned slowly toward him. My life is not your defense. That sentence landed like a door closing. Calvin's mask slipped. Just enough. You think biology makes him your father? He tuned pianos in a street shop while you became what you are. I made a decision that lifted you. There it was. Not remorse. Pride. Clara asked, and the payments? Management. Of what? Risk. Whose risk? Everyone's. Miriam said, mostly yours. Calvin ignored her. Then Clara did something we had not planned. She reached into the folder beside her and took out a photograph of me and Lydia in the hospital hallway before her birth. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Calvin. Look at them. I have seen it. Look anyway. He did. For maybe half a second. Then he looked away. That was the first sign of shame I had ever seen on my brother's face. Small. Starved. But there. Clara asked, what did you tell yourself when you watched them bury an empty box? Calvin's eyes hardened. I told myself grief passes. I stood up in the adjoining room without meaning to. Detective Price put a hand out but did not touch me. Clara's voice stayed level. It did not. Calvin said, that is not my responsibility. The federal agent looked at Price. Price nodded once. They had enough. But Clara was not done. What about the gas line in Samuel's shop? Calvin froze. There are pauses that deny. This pause calculated. His lawyer actually closed his eyes. Sloane muttered, what gas line? Patricia whispered, oh God. Calvin recovered badly. I have no idea what you mean. Clara said, you called him and mentioned old buildings burning. The next morning a cut gas line was found behind his stove. Calvin leaned back. That man has always been careless. Miriam said, careful. That is your brother you are describing. My brother, Calvin snapped, spent his life making small things sound noble because he was too afraid to want more. The room went quiet. Then, because arrogance always reaches for its favorite weapon when cornered, Calvin kept talking. He would have wasted that child in the same little rooms over a piano shop. Lydia would have folded herself into motherhood and resentment. The Thorns gave Clara the world. Clara asked, "And you gave yourself what?" He smiled. "Opportunity." That was the last word he said as a free man. The doors opened. Detective Price entered with 2 officers. Calvin did not understand at first. Men like him always think consequences will negotiate because people have negotiated with them for so long. Then Price said his name and read the first charge. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Fraudulent concealment of birth records. Extortion. Forgery. Elder intimidation. Attempted arson investigation pending. The words kept coming. Patricia began crying before anyone touched her. Sloan shouted from the screen that he was in Florida and demanded counsel. The federal agent smiled without warmth and said, "We know where Florida is, Doctor." Calvin looked through the open door into the adjoining room and saw me. For the first time in my life, I saw him with no story, no emergency competence. No soft sentence about protecting grieving people. Just an old man in an expensive suit realizing the past had found a witness. "You did this," he said. I stepped into the conference room. "I fixed the music box," I said. He stared at me like he did not understand. "Good. Some answers are not for the guilty. They are for the people who survived them." Calvin was taken out through the service elevator because Clara refused to have him walk through the public lobby like a spectacle. That was not mercy. That was control. She wanted the story released on her terms, with documents, charges, and no room for Calvin to play the ruined elder being ambushed by family drama. Patricia cooperated within 2 hours. Sloan was arrested in Florida 3 days later. Calvin's house was searched. They found copies of Lydia's stolen tape, my hospital bracelet, the original false death certificate, payment records from Celia Thorne, and a ledger my brother had kept like criminals do when they believe careful accounting is the same as intelligence. The ledger went back to 1993. First payment, $80,000. Second, $25,000. Annual support. Confidentiality renewals. Consulting. Legacy management. Near the bottom was a note dated 6 months before the gala. CT becoming resistant. Music box problem. SW still alive. SW still alive. Those 3 words stayed with me. My continued breathing had become an inconvenience to my brother. That is a strange thing to learn at 68. Not shocking exactly. By then nothing about Calvin shocked me. But clarifying. The burglary at my shop was tied to a man Calvin hired through an old real estate contact. The gas line had his fingerprints on the service request, not the pipe, but enough surrounding evidence made the attempted arson charge stick as part of a broader intimidation count. Calvin tried every defense available. He said the Thorns initiated the arrangement. He said Sloan made the medical decision. He said Patricia managed the transfer. He said Lydia knew. He said I was unstable. He said Clara was protecting her public image. He said Miriam manipulated evidence. He said Detective Price had political motives. By the end, he had blamed so many people that the jury got to watch a guilty man run out of directions. The trial did not happen quickly. Nothing legal does unless it is unhelpful to ordinary people. The trial did not happen quickly because truth may arrive in one night, but the law travels with luggage. First came the competency games. Calvin's attorney tried to argue that he was too old and medically fragile to endure a long proceeding. Miriam said this was rich coming from a man who had tried to make my age the center of his defense. Detective Price said nothing because she did not like wasting facial expressions. A doctor appointed by the court examined Calvin and concluded he was perfectly capable of understanding the charges, assisting counsel, and manipulating anyone careless enough to stand near him. That last phrase was not in the official report. Miriam wrote it in the margin of her copy. Then came the argument over Lydia's tape. The defense said it was hearsay. The prosecutor said parts of it were admissible for state of mind, notice, and corroboration of later conduct. The judge listened for an hour while lawyers turned my wife's voice into categories. I sat in the gallery with my hands folded and hated everyone for needing language to decide whether the dead could matter. Clara sat beside me that day. Not touching. Close enough that I knew she was there without looking. When the judge ruled that selected portions of the tape could be played, Clara exhaled so softly I almost missed it. After court, she said, "I am glad they get to hear her." I said, "Me too." Then she added, "I hate that they get to judge what part of her is useful." That was exactly it. Court does not receive a person whole. It receives pieces that fit rules. That is necessary. It is also brutal. During those months, Clara's public life became complicated. News does not wait for families to heal. The first article appeared after Calvin's arraignment. Founder of Thorne Biomedical linked to decades-old illegal adoption scheme. Linked. That word did a lot of dirty work. It made her sound connected to the crime instead of created by it. Her board released a statement. Her investors wanted reassurance. Her communications team wanted a softer framing. Miriam wanted to throw somebody through a window. Clara handled it better than any of us. She stood before her employees in the company auditorium and spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She said her history had been hidden through fraud. She said she would cooperate fully with law enforcement. She said no company that made its name organizing medical truth could hide from the truth of its founder's own records. Then she said something I watched 3 times afterward on the internal video she sent me. I was not diminished by finding out where I came from. I was diminished by people who believed I had to be protected from it. That became the line every newspaper used. It helped. But help is not the same as peace. For weeks, photographers waited outside her building. Reporters called my shop. One man from a podcast came in pretending he needed his grandmother's piano tuned. He asked 3 questions about my daughter before he asked one about the piano. I told him the piano was beyond repair and so was his manners. Miriam enjoyed that more than she should have. June did not fully understand the media storm, but she understood enough to become protective. One afternoon, while Clara was giving a statement to counsel in my back room, June sat at the front desk drawing frogs on invoice paper. A reporter knocked on the glass and lifted a camera. Before I could move, June marched to the door, pointed at the closed sign, and shouted, "We are not open for weird men." The reporter left. I gave her a cookie. Clara said I was rewarding aggression. I said I was nurturing boundary skills. For 1 second we sounded like a family arguing about a child instead of survivors discussing security. It was a good second. The harder part was the space between Clara and me. People outside the story wanted us to become sentimental quickly. They wanted the missing daughter to fall into the father's arms. They wanted photographs. They wanted tears that made sense in a headline. Clara refused all of that. I respected it. I also grieved it. Both can be true. Some nights I went upstairs after she left and felt the ache of almost having her. That is a strange ache. Not loss. Not reunion. Something in between. A hallway. One evening she called at 9:30. I answered too fast. She noticed. "You were holding the phone." "No. Samuel." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to ask something and I do not want you to make it beautiful." "I will try not to." "If you had raised me, do you think I would have been happier?" There are questions that are really traps unless the asker is brave. This was not a trap. It was a wound looking for clean air. I sat down at the kitchen table. "No," I said. She did not answer. I continued. "I think you would have had different happiness and different pain. You would have known Lydia. That matters. You would have known me before I got careful and old. That might have helped or annoyed you. You would not have had the Thorne money. You might not have built the same company. You might have hated our apartment. You might have loved the shop. You might have become exactly yourself anyway or someone I cannot imagine. I do not know. Anyone who says they know is trying to sell comfort." She stayed silent long enough that I worried I had failed. Then she said, "Thank you for not making it beautiful." That was the kind of relationship we were building. Not soft all the time. True when possible. During trial prep, the prosecutor made me practice testimony. Her name was Dana Rellease. She was younger than Detective Price, but had the same talent for draining nonsense out of a room. She asked me questions for 3 hours in a conference room while Miriam watched from the corner like a displeased hawk. When did you first suspect Clara Thorne might be your biological daughter? At the foundation dinner. Because of what? The music box. Do not say it like that. Explain why the music box mattered. So I explained. Again. And again. The private lullaby. Lydia's handwriting. The initials. June's statement. Clara's birthmark. The death certificate problems. The adoption records. The DNA. Dana stopped me every time I wandered into grief instead of facts. At first that angered me. Then I understood. The defense wanted grief. Grief could be called confusion. Facts had fewer handles. Do not help them make you look like a man chasing a ghost, Dana said. I was chasing a ghost. No. You were following evidence. Let the jury feel the ghost without giving the defense your neck. That was good advice. Hard advice usually is. Clara practiced too. Her practice was worse because the defense planned to suggest she benefited from the arrangement. They would imply that exposing Calvin let her distance herself from past payments while keeping the life those payments preserved. The cruelty of that made me dizzy. Clara listened to the mock cross-examination without flinching until Dana asked, pretending to be defense counsel, "Isn't it true that every advantage you enjoy today came because you were raised by the Thorne family?" Clara answered too quickly. Yes. Dana stopped. No. Clara blinked. It is true. It is incomplete. Try again. Clara looked irritated. Dana waited. Finally Clara said, "Many advantages in my life came from being raised by the Thornes. None of those advantages required my biological parents being told I was dead." Dana nodded. There. Use that. I wrote it down even though it was not mine to keep. Some truths are useful because they separate what guilty people glue together. Calvin wanted her life and his crime to be one object. They were not. The last week before trial, Miriam found one final witness. A retired orderly named Victor Penn. He had worked nights at St. Agnes in 1993. He was 81 now and living with his daughter in Delaware. Miriam found him through an old hospital staff reunion photo and 3 phone calls that sounded like harassment until they became investigation. Victor remembered the nursery fire. He said it was small. A warmer malfunction. Smoke in one corner. No major damage. No reason for a closed casket. No reason for emergency body handling. Then he said he remembered Calvin. Not by name. By shoes. Calvin wore white leather loafers that night. In a hospital corridor. At 2 in the morning. Victor said no working man wore shoes like that near a nursery emergency unless he wanted people to know he did not work there. He saw Calvin standing with Sloane near a service elevator. Patricia held a bundle. The bundle was not crying. But Victor remembered seeing one tiny hand move. One tiny hand. That testimony nearly broke me more than the DNA. Because a stranger had seen my living daughter leave the hospital and had not known he was witnessing a theft. Victor cried when he gave his deposition. He kept saying he was sorry. I told him the truth. He had been a young orderly with no power standing in a hallway full of people who used titles like weapons. The guilt was not his. He nodded like he heard me. I do not know if he believed me. People blame themselves for the corners of crimes they barely touched because guilt is easier to carry than helplessness. I understand that better now. On the first morning of trial, Clara picked me up instead of sending a car. She drove herself. No driver. No security in the front seat. Just her, me, and the strange quiet of 2 people heading toward a public version of a private wound. Halfway to the courthouse, she said, "I need you to know something." All right. If this goes badly, I am still glad I know. It will not go badly. That was beautiful. Sorry. She glanced at me. You are learning. I smiled despite myself. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Clara reached into the console and handed me a small object wrapped in a cloth. The music box. I do not want it in the evidence room today, she said. Where do you want it? With you. That was trust. Not the easy kind. The kind given with both eyes open. I put it in my coat pocket. The same pocket where I used to carry tuning receipts, old pencils, and once, 31 years earlier, a tiny hospital cap I could not bear to throw away. Courtrooms are colder than they need to be. Maybe that is deliberate. Maybe the law believes discomfort improves honesty. Calvin sat at the defense table in a dark suit. He looked smaller than he had in my shop. Not weak. Compressed. A man trying to fold himself into respectability. When the jury entered, he adjusted his cuffs. Same old Calvin. Still believing presentation could outrun substance. Opening statements took most of the morning. The prosecutor did not begin with emotion. She began with a number. $2,480,000. Then she told the jury that every dollar had a shadow behind it. A false death. A stolen child. A silenced mother. An extorted adult daughter. An elderly father marked for control when he got too close. Calvin's attorney began with love. That was expected. He said Edmund and Celia Thorne loved Clara. He said Samuel and Lydia Ward were devastated. He said Calvin had tried to manage a complicated private tragedy with imperfect tools. He said old records become unreliable. He said memory becomes mythology. He said money does not always mean crime. Miriam leaned toward me and whispered, "He is charging by the fog." I nearly laughed in court. That would have been bad. The first witness was the cemetery records manager. She explained symbolic interment. She explained the ledger. She explained that no casket had ever been received. The defense tried to make it sound like a clerical issue. She said, with perfect calm, a missing comma is a clerical issue. A missing body is not. I loved her a little for that. Victor Penn testified next by video deposition because travel was hard on him. He described the night. The small fire. The service elevator. The bundle. The moving hand. When he apologized again on camera, the jury watched a man who had carried 1 second for 31 years. That mattered. Patricia testified after lunch. She looked older under courtroom lights. Guilt does not always make people look monstrous. Sometimes it makes them look ordinary and tired, which is worse in its own way. She admitted she signed the transfer. She admitted she knew the parents had not consented. She admitted Calvin gave her money. She admitted Sloane told her no one would come looking because the parents had been given closure. Closure. Another clean word hiding a locked door. The defense tried to make her look like she was lying for a deal. She said, "I am lying less for a deal than I lied for money." That line went through the room like a blade. Sloane took the stand 2 days later because his attorneys apparently believed arrogance could look like expertise if he wore a good suit. He explained neonatal instability. He explained emergency discretion. He explained how private placements sometimes happened through charitable channels in the 90s. Then the prosecutor asked, "Did Samuel Ward and Lydia Ward consent?" Sloane talked for 40 seconds. The prosecutor repeated, "Did they consent?" He talked for 20 more. The judge said, "Doctor, answer the question." Sloane said, "Not in writing." That was the nearest he could bring himself to honesty. The prosecutor said, "Not in writing, or not at all." He looked at the jury. Then at Calvin. Then down. "Not at all." I felt Clara move beside me. "Not much." "Enough." By the time Lydia's tape was played, the courtroom already knew the skeleton. Her voice gave it flesh. The allowed portion began with her saying Calvin came by drunk and forgot which version of the story he was supposed to tell. The judge had limited the recording. Only part of it. Still enough. Hearing Lydia's voice through courtroom speakers was almost unbearable. Not because it sounded strange. Because it sounded exactly like her. A little tired. A little wry. Trying to be brave and organized while fear pressed on every word. The jury listened differently after that. I saw it. Before, they had heard a case. Now they heard a kitchen. A dead woman in a kitchen, trying to leave a trail. Calvin stared at the table the whole time. Good. Let him look down. The truth had spent enough years buried. When I finally took the stand, the courtroom became smaller. That surprised me. From the gallery, court had felt enormous, too formal for one family's damage. From the witness chair, it felt like a kitchen table with too many strangers. The prosecutor started gently. Name. Age. Occupation. Marriage to Lydia. Birth of Clara Ward. The hospital call. The closed casket. The symbolic grave I had not known was symbolic. I answered the way Dana had trained me. Short. Clear. No reaching for poetry unless the truth itself required it. Then she asked about the music box. I told them about the foundation dinner. I told them about June placing the box in my hand. I told them about the 6 notes. The prosecutor asked me to hum the melody. I did not want to. Not in that room. Not with Calvin sitting 10 feet away. But I did. 6 notes. That was all. My old man's voice shook on the 4th. Nobody laughed. Then she played the repaired music box for the jury. The whole tune. Thin and bright. The same sound that had crossed from Lydia's kitchen to Clara's nursery to June's cardigan pocket to a courtroom where all of us were older than we should have been. I watched one juror wipe her eye and look angry with herself for doing it. Good, I thought. Be angry. Then came cross-examination. Calvin's attorney was careful. He had learned by then that too much cruelty made the jury lean toward me. So he used concern. Mr. Ward, you suffered an unimaginable loss in 1993, correct? Yes. And grief can affect memory? Yes. You trusted your brother at the time? Yes. You did not personally see your daughter transferred from the hospital? No. You did not personally see Calvin receive money from the Thorns in 1993? No. You did not personally witness Dr. Sloan falsify the death certificate? No. He built the rhythm. No. 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 He wanted the jury to feel absence. Then he asked, so much of what you believe depends on documents found decades later and your emotional response to a song, does it not? That was the trap. Miriam had predicted it almost word for word. I looked at the attorney. Then at the jury. No, I said. He blinked. No. No. What I believe about the song made me start asking. What we found after that is why I am sitting here. The courtroom changed. Not dramatically. Enough. The attorney tried again. You wanted Clara Thorne to be your daughter. Yes. Very badly. Yes. So badly that you might have interpreted coincidences as proof. Yes. He paused because I had agreed too easily. Then I said, that is why we got the DNA test. Miriam later said I should have warned her I was capable of behaving. The attorney moved to Lydia. He suggested she had known enough to consent silently. That almost did it. That nearly pulled me out of the chair and into a version of myself Calvin's defense would have loved. I felt Clara behind me. I did not turn around. I placed both hands flat on the witness rail and said, my wife stayed silent because Calvin taught both of us that truth would destroy the other person. That is not consent. That is fear being used by someone who understands timing. The judge let it stand. The defense moved on. When I stepped down, Clara did not touch me. But she looked at me like she had seen something she needed to see. That was enough. Calvin testified against advice. Of course he did. Some men would rather gamble with prison than sit silently while other people define them. He wore a dark blue suit and spoke gently to the jury. He said he had been young enough to make mistakes and old enough now to regret the language around them. He said the Thorns wanted a child. He said my finances were unstable. He said Lydia's health had been fragile after delivery. He said he made an impossible decision in an impossible night. For 15 minutes, he almost sounded human. Then the prosecutor asked him about the money. That is where performance went to die. Why were you paid $80,000? For facilitation. Facilitation of what? A private placement. With parental consent? With practical consent. The prosecutor looked up. Practical consent is not a legal category, is it? Calvin's jaw tightened. No. And when you later collected payments from Celia Thorne, what were those for? Privacy management. Privacy for whom? For everyone involved. Samuel Ward was involved. Did you tell him? No. Lydia Ward was involved. Did you tell her? No. Clara Thorne was involved. Did you tell her as a child? No. So when you say everyone, you mean everyone who paid you? Calvin did not answer. The prosecutor let the silence work. That was the moment I knew the jury understood him. Not fully. No one fully understands a man like Calvin unless they have lived too close to him. But enough. They understood that every elegant phrase led back to a pocket. After testimony ended, the closing arguments were almost simple. The defense said the past was messy. The prosecutor said Calvin made it messy on purpose. The defense said Clara had a good life. The prosecutor said a good life does not launder a stolen beginning. The defense said Samuel wanted someone to blame. The prosecutor said Calvin had been blaming everyone else for 31 years. Then the jury went out. Waiting for a verdict is its own country. Time does not pass there normally. Clara and I sat in a side room with Miriam, Detective Price, and a coffee machine that produced something legally adjacent to coffee. June was at school. Clara kept checking her phone even though she had turned notifications off. I kept touching the music box in my pocket. Miriam pretended to read a magazine from 2019. Detective Price stood by the window and watched traffic like she suspected it of hiding assets. At one point Clara said, "If they believe him, I do not know what I will do." Miriam did not look up. "They will not. You cannot know that." "No. But I can know when a man has overestimated charm in a room full of normal people." That was as close to optimism as Miriam got. The jury came back after 6 hours. The bailiff knocked once. Clara stood. I stood slower. The music box felt heavy in my pocket. As we walked back into the courtroom, Clara reached for my hand. Not fully. Just 2 fingers touching mine for 3 steps. Then she let go before anyone could photograph it. I never told her how much those 3 steps gave me. There were hearings. Delays. Motions. Arguments about statutes of limitation. Arguments about continuing extortion. Arguments about whether a stolen infant becomes an old crime or a lifelong one. Clara testified for 2 days. She was precise. Not emotional in the way the defense expected. That frustrated them. They wanted a wounded CEO. She gave them dates, amounts, documents, call logs, and one sentence that made the courtroom still. My adoption is not on trial. The crime that made my adoption possible is. I testified after her. I thought I would shake. I did not. I told the jury about the hospital hallway. The closed casket. Lydia's lullaby. The music box. The night we played the tape. The gas line. The phone call. The 31 years of flowers. Calvin would not look at me until the prosecutor asked me to identify him. Then he looked up. For one moment, we were boys again in our father's shop, him charming customers while I swept sawdust from the floor. I wondered if there had been a point where he could have become someone else. Then I remembered my daughter's empty grave and stopped wasting imagination on him. I pointed. That is my brother, Calvin Ward. The verdict came in late on a Thursday. Guilty on the continuing extortion counts. Guilty on conspiracy connected to fraudulent concealment. Guilty on forged records. Guilty on elder intimidation. Guilty on the attempted arson-related charge. Some charges merged. Some did not survive legal argument. That is court. It is not a thunderbolt. It is a machine that grinds, misses some things, catches others, and asks the living to call partial consequence justice because perfect consequence belongs somewhere else. Calvin was sentenced to 29 years. He was 73 by then. Leonard Sloan took a plea after Patricia's testimony became impossible to escape. He lost his license publicly, which mattered to him more than prison at first, then prison mattered quite a lot once the door closed. Patricia received a reduced sentence for cooperation. I have complicated feelings about that. I am old enough to know complicated feelings do not need my permission. Celia and Edmund Thorne were dead, so the law could not question them. Clara questioned them anyway in private. She spent months reading Celia's files, sorting love from purchase, care from concealment, motherhood from fear. I did not intrude. A person can be found and still need privacy. That was hard for me. Harder than I want to admit. After 31 years, the heart wants to collect what was stolen immediately. But Clara was not a refund. She was a person. A person with a childhood I had not witnessed, grief I had not earned the right to name, and loyalties that did not disappear because DNA put my name beside hers. So we moved slowly. At first, coffee once a month. Then lunch. Then she brought June to the shop. June walked in like she owned the place. I knew you could fix it, she said. Hello to you too. Hi. Did you fix it? I handed her the walnut music box. She turned the key. Little Harbor played all the way through. June listened with her whole face. Children do that when adults have not yet taught them to hide wonder. When it ended, she looked at Clara. Her mother's eyes were wet. June looked at me. Is it sad music? I thought about Lydia humming over a closed casket. I thought about Clara hearing her mother's voice on a tape. I thought about the same song surviving in a drawer, a ballroom, a child's pocket, and a courtroom file. No, I said. It is finding music. June accepted that. Children accept better answers than adults. A few weeks later, Clara came alone and asked to see the apartment upstairs. I warned her it was small. She said, I run a company with 1,400 employees. Small sounds restful. I showed her the kitchen. The radiator. The blue raincoat still in the closet. The shelf where I had placed the hospital bracelet, the copy of the DNA result, and a photograph of Lydia when she was 29. Clara stood in front of that photograph for a long time. Then she said, I have her mouth. Yes. And your hands. Apparently. She held one hand up, palm facing mine but not touching. Same long fingers. Same square nail beds. The kind of small inheritance nobody can steal, only delay. After a moment, she lowered her hand. I do not know if I can call you Dad. I do not know if I can hear it without falling apart. That made her laugh. A small real laugh. The first one. We left it there. That is something I want people to understand. A complete story does not mean every feeling becomes simple. It means the lie stops being in charge. The first Christmas after the sentencing, Clara and June came to the shop after closing. Miriam came too because she claimed supervision was necessary whenever wards tried to experience emotion unsupervised. Detective Price sent a card but did not come because, according to Miriam, she had a personality built entirely out of boundaries. We ate takeout on the workbench because I forgot to buy a proper table large enough for 4 people. June played chopsticks badly on the abandoned upright in the back. Clara asked about Lydia. Not the case. Not the hospital. Lydia. So I told her. I told her Lydia hated carnations. Loved crossword puzzles. Burned garlic bread more often than she admitted. Could identify a bird by sound but refused to learn the names of football teams. Stirred tea long after the sugar dissolved. Made Little Harbor because she thought lullabies should sound like boats coming home, not babies going to sleep. Clara listened like a woman collecting pieces of a mother she had never been allowed to know. At the end of the night, June fell asleep in Clara's coat on a chair. Miriam left first. Clara stood by the door holding the music box. Do you still visit the grave? She asked. I did. Past tense. I went last week. What did you do? I removed the flowers. She looked down. Was that hard? Yes. What will you do with the stone? I had thought about that. A lot. The stone said Clara Rose Ward, beloved daughter, 1993. It was not entirely false. She had been beloved. She had been my daughter. Only the death was the lie. I am going to leave it, I said. But I am adding a second line. What line? Return to the living. Clara did not speak. Then she nodded. Not dramatically. Just once. The way she does when something is not easy but is true. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not Calvin being taken out in handcuffs. That was consequence. The revenge was that the story he controlled for 31 years no longer belonged to him. He had turned my daughter into a transaction. We turned every transaction into evidence. He had used documents to bury the truth. We used documents to dig it up. He had counted on grief making me passive. Grief made me patient. He had counted on Clara protecting her public image. She protected the record instead. He had counted on Lydia being dead. Her voice came back on tape and testified louder than any living coward in that room. That is the kind of revenge I believe in now. Not shouting. Not violence. Not some cinematic moment where a villain begs and the hero finally feels clean. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, is taking the thing they used against you and making it carry truth instead. A music box. A death certificate. A payment ledger. A hospital bracelet. A song. A child's whisper. All of it became a rope. And when we pulled, the house Calvin built out of silence came down. I am 68 years old. I still open the shop at 5:30. I still drink coffee black. The abandoned upright in the back finally belongs to someone now. June claimed it. She says she wants to learn piano because family music should not get stuck in boxes. I could not argue with that. Clara visits when she can. Sometimes she calls before coming. Sometimes she just arrives and stands in the shop doorway like she is still deciding whether entering old rooms is safe. I let her decide every time. That is fatherhood now. Not possession. Not catching up. Not demanding the years back. Just holding the door without closing it too fast. On Lydia's birthday this year, Clara and I went to the cemetery together. The stone had been changed. Clara Rose Ward. Beloved daughter. Return to the living. Clara stood in front of it with the music box in both hands. She wound the key. Little Harbor played thin and bright in the cold air. I do not believe music fixes anything. That is too easy. But I believe sometimes music proves something survived. When the song ended, Clara looked at me and said, she would have liked June. Yes, I said. She would have liked me. That question made me older and younger at the same time. She already did, I said. Before she knew anything else about you. Clara nodded. Then, after a long while, she took my hand. No speech. No miracle. Just her hand in mine beside a grave that had finally stopped lying. If there is a lesson here, it is not that blood fixes everything. Blood does not fix greed. It does not repair stolen years. It does not make strangers instantly safe. The lesson is that silence is never neutral inside a family. Silence either protects someone vulnerable or protects someone guilty. And if you do not ask which one, time will ask for you. I waited 31 years because every hard question felt like betrayal of the peace Lydia and I were trying to keep. But peace built on a lie is not peace. It is a room with the lights off. Someone is always trapped in it. Someone is always profiting from the dark. And someone, if they are lucky or stubborn or blessed enough, eventually finds the switch. For me, it was an 8-year-old girl with purple sneakers, a broken music box, and more courage than all the adults who had failed before her. If this story moved you, leave one word in the comments for Lydia, for Clara, or for every family truth that stayed buried too long. Share it with someone who needs courage to ask the question everyone keeps avoiding. And subscribe, because the next story begins where another family's silence finally breaks. Thank you for staying with me until the end.